Get this show rolling. My name is Roger Altizer. I am one of the founders of the Therapeutic Engineering Program at the University of Utah. Go see our booth. We have good swag. I'm also, as part of my day job, I'm the Director of Digital Medicine for the Center for Medical Innovation, meaning that I make medical video games and apps.
I am Megan McIntyre. I'm the Director for Education at the Center for Medical Innovation. I am behind the scenes.
Hi, I'm Jean Shipman. I'm Director of the Health Sciences Library at University of Utah, the Eccles Library, and also the Center for Medical Innovation, Director for Information Transfer.
Yeah, and our title makes a whole lot more sense if you with your internal voice, if you read it like Yoda.
And I read it perfectly well this morning at 8 a.m.
Yeah, it was a fortunate title. We'll call it that. All right, so normally when people talk about games in the body, we kind of talk about negative effects on the body and things like that. But we're going to sort of take a different angle on it today. And my promise to you is, at the end of this presentation, if you may learn something, you may be inspired to do something. At the very least, you'll have some cool anecdotes to throw around at cocktail parties about how games are good for you. Not that I know that people do cocktail parties anymore. But if you travel back to the 50s, you can. All right, so let's start off talking.
Fans of Mad Men here.
We're Mad Men. I think we should dress like that. That'd be great. Okay, so let's start off. Simulations.
So part of what I do at the center is I focus on the medical side, and we're a little behind in gaming here. As you can see here, gaming has been a big part in both the military aspect as well as in the airline industry. Simulation is huge there. I have one line of pilots, and they use simulation for quite a while there to help train pilots as well as maintain safety standards. And you'll see later in this slide deck, actually, a version of what we use in the medical field for simulation, and it's quite a joke. You can actually play it 3 times, so have a go at it. It's very hard. But one of the reasons why simulation has not caught on in the medical field, Jean will talk a little bit about, is FDA regulation. And this is an example of it, actually.
How many played Surgeon Simulator?
Okay, there you go. A few examples. I tried it once, and it didn't go well for me or the patients. That right now. We made it roughly, I think 34 seconds into it. There's blood everywhere. But the FDA plays a big part in why simulation hasn't caught on. An example of what we do is they give you some tools that we use in the OR, and then you kind of move heads around. This is an example of what a flight simulator looks like.
And so to contrast, I think it's right. So they're using, literally surgeons using pegs and tongs.
That we move, they move around.
Right? When you fly an airplane, you get, I kid you not, in this simulator, 3 10 million pixel projectors synced up. In the new Joint Strike Fighter simulator, it's a cockpit simulator where you sit in the cockpit. It is 12 10 million pixel projectors, all synced up and color coordinated. Now to drive that kind of technology, it looks like computers from the 80s. There's a whole rack of computers that are driving that kind of thing. So a vast difference in the fidelity, the quality, the money spent. Medical simulators tend to cost less than $1,500. Big flight sims around the $10 million per unit.
And you're probably wondering why librarians sitting up here, but as the games are becoming medical, there's a lot of information that goes into them, and how, if you're given instruction maybe for a dosage in a game, they want the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, we have a nickname, so I don't remember the Federal Drug Administration. They want that dosage to be pretty accurate, because people may go home and try it at home, and so they want to know that that information is the correct knowledge of the field. So that's why we're here, and having our librarian at the Innovation Center is one of the people that help us.
So the first thing I want to talk about is a game that we all worked on together. So we run this lab up at the U together. This is a fun game. we had a group of people roll in and say, we've got a problem. And that's always a conversation. And the problem was medical discharge information. So when you get out of the hospital, you get a piece of paper that tells you what to do, right? On that piece of paper are frequently pictures. This is the picture for chickenpox. Well, that makes sense, right? And this is chickenpox. The problem is when they tested this image with Chinese immigrants in Utah, the response was, what did that chicken do to that poor man, right? Because it isn't chickenpox in Chinese. The other image, like, so let's say you had a surgery and they had to, cut you open and you need to kind of take things slow. The image for walk slowly is a picture of a man with a turtle on a leash, okay? When they showed it to the Polynesian population in Utah, the response was, only white people take their turtles for walks. And again, because they grew up with Aesop's fables and the story of the tortoise and the hare, and so it's not the same dominant meme. So these images are culturally situated, which is interesting, and they're not giving the medical information that people need to be able to take care of themselves, right? So we all worked on a game called Doodle Health. And you can go here, you can go play Doodle Health right now. If you go to doodlehealth.com, you can play this, and it's what's known as, oh wow, that's really, that's pretty fantastic. We love mustard. So for Doodle Health, it's what's called a guap, a game with a purpose, okay? So you play this game, this game's a whole lot like Pictionary. You either see medical images and you guess what they are, or you get a term and you draw it, right? You, on your phone, you move it up right now, and draw medical images, okay? And the cool thing about that is, we then show those medical images to other players. We see if other players can guess them, right? And they get this whole collection, this whole database of images, and they sort of understand what people are thinking. The public version of this, doodlehealth.com, it asks you to go based by race, but the study version, so we have another version we're using, a clinical study, is actually being given to specific communities in Utah, right? So we're saying, do specific communities draw different pictures for health and medical information? And so far the answer is
And we're hoping to use that information in our EMR, electronic medical records, so that the patient gets this discharge information in pictograms instead of text, in case they can read diseases.
Yeah. Other things that we're doing to you that are kind of games with a purpose, and we'll talk about this one real quick. The Treadport is a very large treadmill, and it does a couple of things that are really interesting. On the bottom left corner, you see those little lines with the green lines and all that nonsense. That's actually a diagram of how wind works in this. And if you'll notice the harness, it's on the person's back. It looks like a big stick sticking in their back. And there's a harness lifting them. It's a game for spinal cord injury patients. Okay? We actually know that using this contraption, that people will voluntarily exercise or do PT, physical therapy, 35% more than regular. Because it's more fun. And it's more engaging. You lose yourself in it. And the folks that we made the software, the folks that made the hardware were into it, right? So like the wind, when you have a fan blow on you, there's chop because the blades are chopping it. So here the wind blows against the screen, fights itself in a vortex, and comes at you with a wall of wind. It feels more like real wind. And they have these scent emitters that they spray into the wind as well for smell-o-vision. And then above you they have a heat lamp so they can make you miserable while you do it. Just that part. But so games with a purpose. People make all kinds of games. But what we want to chat about is here. Things that are good for you that you wouldn't expect to be good for you. Right? I think that's going to be really interesting. Can you guys agree with this? Yeah, poor sad Mario. He's not quite sad Keanu, he's not that popular. But sad Mario does all right for himself. All right, so fun trivia fact. Sad trivia fact. By 2020, depression will be the second most burdensome disease in our nation, across all age groups and across all sexes. That means that more work will be lost to depression and more money spent on depression than almost anything else out there. And so if we think about diseases, frequently we think about big things, right? We think about, cancer, or we think about ALS, right? And all these big diseases, because they're really, they're horrible. They're life-changing. You see someone who has your heart goes out to them. Depression, though, is so widespread It has such an impact on our culture that it's an issue. It's an issue. So the first solution for it, you might be familiar with this one. Drugs, right? So if you like drugs and you don't like depression, they've got a solution for you, right? That's pills. The problem with pills are, well, they're pills. That's a problem, right?
There's that FDA thing again.
There's the FDA again, right? That makes them hard to get. I mean, Gene's exactly right, because you can't roll into Walgreens and say, hey doc, I need some Allegra, I need some Band-Aids, I need some Zoloft, right? You need a prescription, you need all that, right? So fewer than 25% of people with depression end up getting medication. That's because medication is difficult to get in this country. It's expensive to get in this country, and it's complicated to get in this country. And a lot of people don't want to admit it. Go to the doctor and say, hey, doc, I'm depressed, you need to give me some drugs, because they're afraid of scrutiny or whatever.
Plus, each drug costs billions to develop, so there's a cost behind the scenes too, not just the counter.
Quite literally, I think you probably know about that, right? How long drugs take to develop.
16
It
years.
takes years, as well as just like, I'm sure you guys hear about it all, but what drugs are most effective in. There's a lot that goes into what ones are chosen to be developed and what ones are not chosen to be developed.
Yeah, it's a really, really expensive field. So there's another solution, and it's Bejeweled. Yeah, Candy Crush works as well. Yeah. How many of you have played Bejeweled? Okay. So one time being like way in the past, like the 1990s, they were selling. So back when people bought video games, they were selling a copy of Bejeweled every 30 seconds. Everything was like this. It was great. They even had a little timer that would knock over the time. They knew they were making a little bit of money every 30 seconds. Because it was on everything. It was on your flip phone, right? It was that's all I remember from the 90s. It was a rough time. But bottom line, here's what they know. Playing Bejeweled helped with depression. And what's interesting, and this gets to your point, Gene, we could prescribe Bejeweled. So rather than just saying, hey, go exercise, it's good for you, we can tell you the amount of Bejeweled you play. It can be scientifically measured.
I would overdose immediately.
So Jean's up there, she's going to rehab for Bejeweled.
Mine's diner.
You're a diner dasher?
No, I get enough of that.
That's it, it's just,
I had to delete it off the phone.
we all have.
Yeah.
So how do they figure this stuff out, right? How do they figure out Bejeweled is good for you? Well, at East Carolina University, they did 2 lab play sessions, 1 month apart, 30 minutes, 3 times a week for the group playing the games, and then other people did not. And then the genes of the group skewed the results. So you were asked to play 30 minutes 3 times a week. Most people played 40.7 minutes. So they're playing longer than they should. They then did EEG, HRV, and paper-based tests. EEG, they measure the stuff that's going on in your noggin. HRV, they're measuring the stuff that's going on in your heart, your body. Paper-based tests, they're testing your pencil. So that's what they did. This is what they figured out. They figured out significant reductions in depression, moving from moderate to severe to minor or minimal. That's a huge win. Minor or minimal is generally the term used to something that you can just kind of handle, right? So like if you're say, doctor says, how about the pain in your ankle? And you go, doctor, it's horrific, right? Then I don't know why you do like that. The doctor will give you medication. But if you say, it kind of hurts, and then the doctor will either say, quit whining or stretch. Less anger, increased vigor, decreased fatigue, and this is the key. Decreased reduction in state and trait anxiety, right? State and trait anxiety. So I bet you at least 2 people in this room have experienced anxiety at least once in their life. And I know because I'm one of them, right? So I'm hoping to be someone else. But if you ever had a test and you're worried about it, or you're doing like this right now, like this is happening in real life right now. When you need some Bejeweled, it makes you have anxiety. So state anxiety happens to almost everybody, right? If something happens, you get all stressed out. is you kind of live with anxiety, that at any given moment you're kind of feeling anxious and you have anxiety is a problem for you. You have trouble sleeping, might have trouble eating, you have trouble focusing at work, those kind of things. Significant reduction in both.
Sounds like Mondays.
It sounds like it's one of the Mondays, right? It's literally what it is. Every day. Every day is Monday. Conclusion is a wall of text. Basically what they say in a nutshell is we can measure video games and prescribe them for therapeutic use. That it doesn't have to be just for someone's adjunct therapy, right? So like if your doctor says, get exercise, eat less calories, right? That's advice that's good for you, right? That's good stuff. But specifically telling you what you should do, that's new. Now it's your FDA.
Yeah, because they want actually the games to represent real life for the FDA, so it takes some of the fun out of it, but it gives you some education about what kind of food's good for your diet and things like that. So.
Yeah. Like when the doctor says eat healthy, like that's a struggle for me. But when the doctor says take 2 of these in the morning, I'm an accountant, right? So like that's not a problem. And so that's the nice thing about having this perspective. All right, so let's show things up. So you know this game, right?
I do know this game. This was a big game. This was, I think, one of the first big games on the market. It was funded by the Department of Defense for treatment of IUD victims and burn victims coming over from Afghanistan, actually. And it was proven more effective than heavy dose narcotics when they were receiving wound care and physical therapy. And the basis of it, but it was one that really launched the platform for medical games in the medical field, and has really driven it forward for us.
She's exactly right. It revolutionized things for us because it was a measured game that said, this is the first game they measured that said you could use a game instead of drugs. Burns are some of the most painful things you could ever face. This is Lieutenant Sam Brown was injured in Afghanistan, 2008. This was a photo taken recently. Back in 2008, he had burns over 90% of his body. So he was hurt. And this is him getting treatment just 2 years ago. So that's how long it takes to get treatment on these things, right? I mean, it goes on for a long time. The horrible part about burns, aside from the initial pain of it, and of course the stigma of being burned, is the skin is dead and constantly reproducing correctly. So the treatment is you gotta scrape the skin off and stretch, right? And that's horrible, right? It's extraordinarily painful, which is why severe burn victims frequently become addicted to morphine. Okay, so this was an attempt to alleviate that. The game is a silly Oculus Rift kind of game. You look at it through virtual reality, you throw snowballs at things, there's Paul Simon playing in the background. I know.
Best part.
You promised, you and Gene promised to hum it. You said you were going to hum it. One of you can call the other one Al.
It really is just snowballs. So you just use the mouse and you just throw snowballs at like mammoths and snowmen and penguins.
And so the being distracted part clearly makes sense, right? You know, your doctor says, hey, look at me, and it sticks you with a needle and you get it, right? So that's been established medically for a long time. It's actually called snapping your fingers.
I know this.
But they actually don't know why this works just yet. They know that it works. And so the studies have shown decreased need for pain medication. And what's funny is when you use it on people who aren't injured, you also see decreasing pain. So for example, they'll do what's called a needle test, right? A needle pain test. Where they'll poke a needle in your foot or your hand, and then you rate the pain. And so you'll sit there and think, ow, that hurt, ow, that hurt. And people experience, so healthy patients experience 30 to 50% less sensation. Meaning that sometimes they get poked with a needle and you know they're getting poked.
That's nice.
And so, you know, this is a game as therapy, a game that's good for you. as opposed to something you just kind of play in the phone. Another one that's kind of interesting is a study that happened at RIT. It's a big school back east. They also have a big school video game program. Or a couple of friends of ours. One of the first things that goes as you get older is your vision. I think that's not a secret. That your eyesight increases with age. And so what they did was they did a study that looked at the effects of games on vision. They looked at 2 games in particular. They wanted to be therapeutic. They looked at The Sims, Zuma Zuma, and they looked at Call of Duty. Right? These are pretty different games.
I'm trying to see the difference.
These are the same in your mind.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So when someone asks for this for Christmas, you deliver this, or this for Christmas, you deliver this.
Holiday, no holiday. I get it.
It's all holidays. It's all
The
holidays.
Christmas tree's missing there. I guess it's the,
Yep.
I can see that now.
So contrast sensitivity is the first thing to go as you get older. And what they showed was these games increased contrast sensitivity function. That when you had people play them, they got better eyesight. It's going to your way. 3 reasons. They don't know why again. They just measured it and it works. So now we have to do more studies to find out why. The 3 hypotheses though are constant focusing, beneficial to the eyes, constantly scanning for danger, strengthens the eyes, and that because it's so much fun, you get more learning. And that last point is the truth of any great education or motivational game, right? Because it's more, when you have more fun, you learn more. The constant scanning for danger is interesting because you're certainly looking around the screen of The Sims, but it's called anticipatory vision, where you think there might be someone up in the top left corner off screen, so your eyes go up there and then you move the camera to go with your eye speed. And that's actually some pretty advanced eye techniques. And you don't learn that, you learn it through the game. No one teaches you that, right? So this is what it normally looks like for a 40 or plus year old person driving at night in poor conditions. And the improvement is this dramatic.
I see the difference now.
You see the difference? Right? And what was interesting about it is it only worked with first-person shooters. It didn't work with any other type of game, including other first-person games. It didn't work with racing games. It didn't work with puzzle games. It didn't work with slow first-person games. It was literally first-person shooters. Yeah. No. Play The Sims all you want, and all you do is go and buy a bunch of stuff.
So that's my shopping.
So that's the game. Right? That's your problem. But if you want to see better at night, you have to play a lot of Call of Duty. And it was a pretty significant amount. You had to play quite a bit. The other findings of the study were that people who played first-person shooters pretty seriously, and you had to have a serious attitude about playing it, also had decreased lazy eye. And what they want to do at RIT now, they actually asked us to do it, and we told them to ask their own game department, not because we're mean, but because they have an excellent game department, to make a non-violent first-person shooter. Because they want to help kids with lazy eye and use this as therapy, but it's really tough for doctors to hand out Call of Duty. So, yeah, donut duty. Everything you know. So, yeah, water gets to be good. Something's got to be intense though. Remission is one of the earliest popular games for health. And Remission it's a really good looking game. It's about $2 million to build. It's a game to help children fight cancer. Remission is interesting for a number of reasons. It's one of the most studied serious games out there. It's one of the most popular serious games out there. It's also one of the most controversial serious games out there. The whole reason it's controversial is because of the hypersexualized avatar. So she is often in a lot of the ad stuff putting poses that are like Laura Croft, right? Because the people who made the game were professional game developers, and they make those kinds of games. They make 3D action games. So when they pose women, they pose women, right? And
They asked me first, but I turned it down.
I don't know.
I missed it.
I don't know if you were my hands. But, and, yeah, that's So it was a problem because a lot of doctors and nurses didn't want to hand it out because the cover art was offensive, right? And they're going, geez Louise, why am I going to give this to kids? But the game was actually extremely effective, and the design of the game was to help teach young adults about their medication, how to take the medication, when to take the medication, what the medication was doing for them. And you flew around, you blasted cancer cells with your meds, right? So it's kind of cool. It was actually the first video game to be studied using fMRI data. So this is the first game that we got some brain scans out of. Now we're getting a lot more of them. The problem is this is an expensive nonsense, right? It is expensive to get an fMRI. It's really expensive to figure out how to do it with a video game. Because you turn it on, the controller gets sucked up to the top of the machine, right? So, it is some complex stuff. And this is, boy, I tell you what, this is the one you want to throw around a lot. This is your brain on games, this is your brain on books. The image on the left is an image of someone playing remission. The image on the right is someone watching remission.
Or monkeys.
So it's the same, they're the same visual input. The play matters. When someone is playing a game, their brain is on fire. And if you think about why, it's because you're making a gazillion decisions, right? Not just about, do I move right or left, but how do I move my fingers? Do I like this game? Will it look stupid? Right? There's all this stuff that's going on that's visual input, but you have all this stuff to do that's output as well. All these decisions you have to make and the things you have to do. The image on the right is actually very similar to the way brain scans look like when you watch movies or read books. This is why it's really interesting for educators and medical professionals. Because physiologically, your brain is doing something inherently different when you're playing a game versus receiving information in any other medium. And sure, your imagination goes when you're reading a book, but you're kind of busy reading the book, right? You might pause and imagine, and then your brain lights up. But while you're actually reading, you only need the parts of your brain that are responsible for language. Right? The same is true for movies, for vision. But here, it's all thinking stuff. HPA corridor is on fire. The HPA corridor is that thing that puts adrenaline into your body, right? And it's your reward center. And because you're doing something and being rewarded for it, your brain goes. And so it can be little things like just saying, okay, I want to go to the left. I press the stick to the left. The tube totally moved to the left. Your brain's like, yeah! Right? It's kind of amazing how it works. Much less when you sound recordings or whatever else. And what I think is really funny about this game is, and this is how I know I'm old, man, they just totally ripped off Inner Space. Right? That movie way back in the day, it's just that movie. Right? You get shrunk down, you're on the bloodstream. It is the same. All right, our remission caused shift in motion, knowledge, perceptions, and chemotherapy, meaning that you're going to be better at having cancer. You have a better chance of being. You're going to take your drugs. You're going to have a better attitude. And motivation and emotion are different than any other form of information. When reading a book, looking at a poster, hearing a motivation speaker, watching a video, playing a game, totally different. We made one. We made a game for kids fighting cancer. It's awesome. This is the prototype, and our game is different because our game is actually based more on getting children physical exercise when they're in the hospital, as well as being more active. Kids get most of their exercise through play, right? And so in the hospital, kids don't play, and they also don't have access to physical therapy because the machines are doing for adults. So they get their exercise this way. It's a lot of fun. They can empower them to beat their disease. What's interesting about this picture is two things. The three things I learned as a developer on this were, number one, physical therapists hate motion control games. And one of the reasons is because there's no knowledge of body mechanics and how these games are built. So like try building a Wii game, and the game is called Lasso the horses? Cows? Lasso the cows and horses. I'm just going to make the game do this. Because that's totally like a lasso. It's a metaphor, right? It's analogous. But it's going to hurt my wrist, right? And so there's no sense of body mechanics and how the body works. And so we actually consulted with physical therapists, and they scolded us for our designs. And then we actually developed a patent together. And our patent has numerous aspects to it, but one of the major ones is we actually have a system now that if you have a game that has a motion, you have to play a game with a cross motion to loosen up those joints before you go back to that motion. There's a timer on it. So if you play a game where you're doing this, you have to play a game that does this in between. You can't go back to that game and walk the shit out of it, which is always something you love me locked out of games. The second thing is I had no idea you could do cardiovascular activity with your upper body. I always assumed you have to run, right? But apparently you can break a sweat doing this. Get your bit up. And the third thing is that kids are weird. So we designed all sorts of great games, and we did all sorts of research to design these games, and the most popular one was recycle. And we had smashing crabs, and rescuing babies, and fighting waves, throwing whales at the moon, and all sorts of and this was the most popular one, throwing away trash. The reason is interesting. We know that throwing things in 3D space is entertaining, right? Like people like arts, right? What was fascinating was the reason the kids liked this, and actually came out of interviews with them, because in their age demographic, they were all learning about recycling. And because they're sick, they're not allowed to touch anything. They're not allowed to touch trash or anything dirty. And so they're all bummed out because their friends are all learning about recycling and getting to recycle and feeling like they're making a difference in the world when you're 12 years old. And these kids couldn't. And so the stupid recycling game, which I thought, it was a lame game, like it hardly tracks, and it's kind of embarrassing. And they loved it the most.
They just want it to be normal, right? They just want a normal day, like anyone else.
That's all I wanted.
I think what's interesting about this game, in comparison to Remission, though, was, and why Remission didn't necessarily work, and why this one's so successful, was this was a real collaboration between the physicians, the physical therapists, as well as the people who were making the game. And everyone, the communication between them, this was not just handed off. This wasn't a thing where it was said, we want a game, and the people who make the games make the game. This was, it's like Roger said, we work with physical therapists, we work with the actual doctors, and this is something that's given. It's, the cover art's not embarrassing. It was nuts.
I do see a shape in that third trash can.
I'm worried about the third trash can too. But Megan's exactly right, and actually that's the future of what we're trying to do, is that that collaboration.
And that's something that's really, I think, working well is what we're doing now. And something that, anytime we go and talk to physicians about what we do with, we say the Gap Lab, and it's, we have 6 doctors like we have something. And they're just very excited about the possibilities.
We are as well. It's interesting. I made a lot of games, but making a game that changes people's lives is interesting. It's something different. And knowing that it does, having researchers, having librarians, having doctors involved, it means that we know that we're working on a connection. One of the theories behind this idea about why these games work is, so this is a game theory flow. The idea is that, and this is just bullshit stuff way up, that if a game gets too hard too fast, you get anxious. If your skill gets better than the game too quickly, you get bored. The perfect place is in between those two things. That makes sense. As your skill gets better, the game's more difficult. What's interesting about this is one of the first psychologically measured notions of game theory, in that time loss occurs. You ever sat down at a game and like 8 hours passed? You lost it, right? So I can remember vividly the first time that happened to me. I was 19 years old. I was a freshman. Don't laugh, I fell back in 3rd grade. I'm at Chico State in California, and I'm in my dorm room, and I start to play Civilization. Civilization just got right, the first one. So I play Civ. And I had played this game for a long time. I loved games. So I sat down to play Civ. It's 6 o'clock, and then it was totally 6 o'clock again. Right? And I'm like, oh my god, I'm so smelly, I'm so sweaty, and I'm playing this game for 12 hours. And then my roommate goes, 2 fish have been playing for 24. And I played a full day without sleep or even getting out of my chair.
Was it a Monday?
It might have been a Monday. with the Kathy curse, right? And so, yeah, so, but that's what happens with games. You lose yourself, they have an interesting psychological effect on you now starting to discover. So, lots of good things about games, they're safe. We want to leave you with one thought and let you have some questions. You hear a lot about the negative impacts of games, about games causing violence, about games causing obesity, about games doing all sorts of horrible things to people. I want you to worry less about games, because the reality is we don't know that much about games. We're just figuring it out. We're tip of the iceberg figuring out what games do to people psychologically and physiologically. Because it's really darn hard to do these studies. It costs a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time. So we're just kind of figuring it out. So if people are to worry less and wonder more, it's what we want to leave you with. There's some things out here. Oh yeah, that's a funny quote. For those who can't read in the back, it says, the new study says surgeons who play video games are better at their jobs. True. Better mental dexterity. Then again, you really want to go to a surgeon who believes that everyone needs their lives. So that's it for us. And so if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. And we have some great experts in the field and stuff. Or if you have snide comments, we'll also be the recipients of those. Was it wow? Dude, my ex was a great night driver. Yeah. Totally. Oh, that guilt, yeah, it's horrible. That's a good question. Yeah, please.
I think that comes some with differentiating from the medical field, right? So like you said, you're on something for your anxiety and depression. Imagine if that gameplay came with that same comfort of receiving that prescription for those same prescriptions, right? For your, whatever pills you take for that. Right? It's kind of the same way for me. So you wouldn't receive that same guilt after playing the game. So I think that's what we hope to do with these games. And as the FDA becomes more involved in the regulations, so again, that prescription would come with, the gameplay would come with a certain more regulation. You play this for this amount of time, this long, and so it comes with its own set of boundaries. And I think that internal guilt, you wouldn't have it basically. It would become something that is you would view it as a positive acceptance, be a positive reinforcement rather than a negative.
And I could see the day where it's customized prescription too, like play 2 hours, take a break, play 2 hours, but it's going to be different per person. And once we can really analyze what's happening in the brain, and all the days are not the same, it'll be very individual.
It's kind of like Roger said, we don't know a lot, and we're hoping to change, cultural view of negative. The gaming is negative. It's not. We're not necessarily using it that way.
I think that's job security for me. Because this factual information that has to accompany the gaming and the apps that are being developed and being regulated by the FDA, it's really big.
It's becoming a very big part of industry itself. There's a lot of, on our side, there's a company called Winsome Arts that's becoming involved in deciding which games, basically saying which games are ranking games, basically, and apps and things like that. And these are not, some are ones they play, some are people play, so there's a lot that's going into, saying, from the health aspect to help change that stigma.
So there'll be over-the-counter games and then there'll be prescription games.
It's going to be all sorts.
Unique biology. And real quick, the addiction thing is always a question that comes up. And video game addiction is always a concern. And the one thing I would always remind people of is that the way that the medical field thinks about addiction is really different than the way we tend to think about addiction. We tend to think about addiction as related to the substance, right? So someone is addicted to heroin, or someone is addicted to alcohol, or someone is addicted to whatever. Psychosocially, especially the DSM, or the tool that psychologists use, addiction is the disease, right? It's not about the thing. And so addiction is what needs to be treated, and not the actual thing itself. So you can get addicted to all sorts of things. There are people who run to the point that they hurt themselves, right? There are people who do all sorts of things that are normally healthy behaviors to the point of where it actually harms them. And so that's really the issue. And video game addiction is interesting because it's new, and it's terrifying to see someone with video addiction in their life. But if you see an addiction of any sort, you know that it's just devastating to families. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's video games, golf, or heroin. Take video games or golf before heroin, please. If you have a basic personality, probably that order, video games, golf, and
Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
Have they done any research on how long do the effects last in the future versus something
So no is the answer to that. But they think that they liken it more towards more similar. Like the initial thought is that it's actually more like drugs. That it's while you're doing it, you get the results. Right? So we'll see though. But there are some great research on CBT in video games though. So we'll see where that all goes. And you can imagine because if you want to change people's behavior, like therapy in video games is a massive work being done in there. There's great work being done at USC. Rivals. But they do amazing work down there on PTSD and games.
And we had the opportunity to go to a conference of research gamers, and there's actually a man from Copenhagen that's looking at addiction games and really doing serious research. See more.
Totally, right?
Totally. And I'm not ready to say that.
There's a lot with Alzheimer's right now, too, looking at that kind of research. I know you're not close, but just when it gets there, the idea of preventing it and keeping your mind active.
Well, I know that like my mother is a daughter around me, and just different things that you just have no idea that it's actually helping her or cognitive or but it is. I just wondering when you start.
So this is the problem, right? So there are lots of games out there. In fact, the Nintendo DS originally was bigger selling with patients over 50 in Japan than people under 50. And the idea was because a study came out that doing that would help cognitive function and keep you mentally nimble. And there's a great game that shows that for people who are over 50, that if you play it 20 minutes a day, you'll have the multitasking ability of a 20, right? So it's really great. The problem is though, man, I can make a game like this afternoon that you press a button, a light flashes, you get 5 points, and totally lie to you. You just say, this game makes you more beautiful, right? Or this game makes you thinner, or whatever.
I tried that game.
And there's no regulation. So there's no way to verify if that's true or not, right? And so that's actually the work that I think that Jane's doing that's really important, is cataloging games and documenting them and then displaying to consumers the research behind the game. Because, we could both make a game and my game would be totally BS and her game would be awesome. And how do you know as the consumer? Yeah, and it really depends on what the individual needs are and things like that. So there are like Medline has a list, don't they?
Yeah, the National Library of Medicine, if you Google library, games, and medical, and you'll get a whole list. And there's lots for children, there's lots for adults. And they try to catalog them.
Okay, so what would you do? You do library games medical?
Yeah, library, games, medical, Google.
Is the National Library of Medicine has a great list of games that have been verified.
That's another one like Police Smarts. That's basically where they're doing it. There would be an industry one that's trying to get them all the same. Which games are good, which games are not. So there are whole categories.
On some games there are, right? There are actually a lot of games. So like the eye tracking game. So you could play serious Call of Duty and your visual would be better. Or you could play Bejeweled for 30 minutes 3 times a week and help with anxiety. And you can play there's actually games that have been studied. The problem is finding them, right? Is how do you know which ones? And that's the work that we're trying to get done, and that's what Gene's programming actually is trying to make a list of what actually helps. Because like there are herbs that help you and there are herbs that don't, right? So like we know that fish oil helps you and St. John's wort helps you, but I think you can probably eat as much nutmeg as you want. So how do you know which one? Someone does a study and makes a list, right?
Smell really good.
I don't know figure that, right? Any other questions? We got like 4 minutes left. Are there any questions? Back.
Yeah, so serious games have been around for a while. GDC has a whole panel for them and everything. So, in the research you guys have done, I feel like, sometimes the hard part is finding the sweet spot between what makes a game fun and then what actually is a transferable skill that you can learn from. So,
Yeah.
in your guys' experience, where do you feel like that sweet spot is? Like, how far can you go with a serious game as far as the learning experience?
You can go all the way. The problem with most serious games is you either gave game technology to an educator or you gave a lesson plan to a game developer. And both of those are recipes for disaster, right? So if there are plenty of games. So if you look at games like Call of Duty isn't there, right? Clearly Call of Duty is fun. And clearly Bejeweled is fun, right? And there's some great therapeutic games that are out there in educational games. Like how many people here played Oregon Trail? Right? Oregon Trail still sells. Right? People buy Oregon Trail on iOS with like real money. It blows my mind. Like this is a 30-year-old game, right? So I don't think the idea that there is a separation is a problem. It's actually a problem in the serious games community because a lot of the theories that they want to make about educational games ignore good game design principles. People have been studying how to make great games for a long time and we make great games. People study how to make great lessons for a long time, but for some reason, when we study serious games, we don't go to either of those places and just make up new stuff, right? So if you got the people who can make great lessons together, the people who make great games together, then you end up with like a Reese's Pieces.
But I think medical training is really a key area that can benefit from gaming and simulation because of it being so image and visual based, especially in neurology and ophthalmology. But it just, I think it's coming in because the traditional education was kind of the sage on the stage and transferring the knowledge. This is of interest to many institutions now to do this kind of education.
Like with the PE game, for example, the patient empowerment game that we showed with the kids with move controllers. So the move, no one can do this. The move was awful, right? Especially the first generation, right? It was tough to get synced. It was a cool platform, really great technology, but it was hard to make into compelling games. And we actually took the game to Electronic Arts and got consultation on it. We worked with a ton of people on it. The biggest part that we had with the game was the fact that those prototypes were getting up and running with pages like they could see behind the button. Once we got everything up and running, we had to stop the kids from playing. Right? They would play like crazy. Part of it's our captive audience, right? They're kids with camp in a hospital. So yeah, this is gonna be awesome. We do this till the end of time, right? But you could make real games. And the problem is I think that people don't want to make real games. They want to make what they consider to be serious games. They can literally make real games and then just squeeze them on the Other questions? math for that? Yeah. For the most part, it's actually less like drugs that have a narcotic effect, right? So the reason you get told not to take so many drugs is because of the side effect, right? So if you take too many Tylenol, you die, right? Or if you take too many, whatever, you get sick. Odds are you play too much with jewels, and you just like this there, right? So certain therapies, the prescription is more about how to get the optimal benefit out of it, and less about protection. Whereas like most of the prescription drugs we take, those are about protecting us. And so games would look more like, it'd be more like when your doctor says, all right, if you want to lose 25 pounds, you need to run for 30 minutes a day, 4 times a week. But if you ran 8 times a week, your doctor's going to say, you're awesome, right? So hopefully that's what everyone's going to do. If they want to your doctor say, awesome. That's us. We don't want to waste 9% time. So thank you very much.